Dog of Death is without question one of my least favourite episodes of The Simpsons that I've seen. This is not because it's a bad episode, but because I hate anything that deals with sick animals, even if it's animation. So when I watched this, I watched it just now because I am watching them all in order again, but I hadn't seen this episode in quite a long time, since the last time I tried to watch every episode of The Simpsons. So this is not an episode that I will watch too often. But I can see it for what it is and think it is a well crafted episode. It's just a little bit too emotional. This is the 19th episode of the third season of The Simpsons, originally aired in March of 1992, directed by Jim Reardon. And in this episode, we have the brilliant Frank Welker voicing Santa's little helper. Santa's little helper is not very well, so they take him to the vet, and it transpires that he has a twisted stomach, I believe. And of course, in order to fix this, he's going to have an operation, but this is going to be a lot of money. And the Simpsons, realize that they have to give him this operation. He's not just a pet, he's part of the family. But in doing so, they suddenly significantly reduce their quality of life. And we have, it's not funny when you think about it and when I say this out loud, but in the moment, in the scene, when they're living basically hand to mouth and threadbare and they have no money or anything, it gives us some very comedic scenes. Obviously, in real life, that's awful, and unfortunately, with the cost of vet bills, especially if you don't have pet insurance, these things can be very costly and can really set people back. So you should always get pet insurance. Unfortunately, The Simpsons didn't do that. And Santa's little helper is feeling very guilty about this, so he runs away and ends up... Will I say where he ends up? Is it a spoiler? It's listed on the IMDb page as being information, but I won't say just now what happens to him. I will in a couple of minutes or even seconds with a spoiler warning. But he runs away, something happens to him, and the fate of Santa's little helper becomes very questionable. We don't know what's going to happen to him, and of course we see the Simpsons reacting in the way we would imagine. They're heartbroken that he is missing. They can't believe they ever begrudged him the operation. It's a very moving episode, and as an animal lover, it is something that I find to be quite upsetting, and I will never choose to watch this. And obviously I watched it for the purpose of refreshing my memory with what it was about and what happened, and when I look at it, there's nothing about it that's wrong. The narrative flows well, the editing is good, the animation is good, it's emotive, it's thought-provoking, even if that thought is just, I better go and get pet insurance. And I think it's quite interesting. So the spoiler with what happens to Santa's little helper is as follows. When he runs away, he ends up being owned by Mr. Burns and being retrained as an attack dog, which I think is quite an interesting decision. Of course, this is one of the few times this early on that we get to hear Release the Hounds. Of course, that becomes more and more prominent as the seasons go on. And, of course, what happens as a result of that, I think it's such a lovely moment. This is a spoiler. This is, of course, a spoiler for pretty much how the episode ends. But towards the end, Bart is about to approach Mr. Burns and ask for help, and he doesn't know Santa's little helper is there, and Santa's little helper comes charging out because Mr. Burns says release the hounds. And there's a moment where Santa's little helper is vicious and you think he's going to bite Bart, but then he realizes at the last second that this is Bart, this is his boy, this is his human, and a switch is flicked in his brain and he begins to smother him in licks and kisses. And I think that really, I don't know if this was their intention, but into that it's very easy to read that a dog is not inherently evil. You can train a dog to be evil. Mistreating a dog will cause it to be evil. But when it's reminded of love and affection and what it's like to be loved and cared for, it's a nice, sweet dog who will not attack. There are, of course, some exceptions, but as a former owner of a staffy, I'm well aware of the misconceptions surrounding those dogs. There are some, of course, who are just difficult to train and who are quite aggressive, but generally speaking, there are no bad breeds, only bad owners. And I think that moment where Santa's little helper remembers what it's like to be cared for and loved, and changes his behaviour as a result of that, I think is really moving. It's a split second, and it's just so effective, and I found it to be really powerful. So even though I don't like watching the episode, because it upsets me, I do think it's quite strong and worth watching if you can. Dog of Death will never be my favourite episode, but because of the messages in it, I think it's still really powerful.